MOD is quite unusual in that we're also a customer. We're not just somebody looking to foster innovation that goes to sell to the world. We can be an anchor customer. We can get our supply chain, often smaller companies, to cash flow break even alone and open up NATO markets as well. So quite unusual in what we can bring to cross-government collaboration. But we're working, for example, in next generation energy, we're working with DNES. For space, we're working with DCIT. So we have got a lot of cross-government collaborations going, and I think that's a great thing.
Thank you, Clive. Rachel Gilmore, please.
Nice to hear the voice of reason. And interestingly, without a civil servant's background. So I'd like to ask Annalie Riley, if you don't mind. So when do you think the MOD will achieve the Strategic Defence Review's vision of delivering the best kit and technology into the hands of our frontline forces at speed? And obviously, I'm posing that question within a completely different context of what frontline forces might have needed even 5 or 6 years ago, because as a recent and regular visitor to the Ukraine, I'm very, very aware that certainly in terms of drone technology and things like that, there is very much that we need to do.
Brilliant question. I might start and then hand over to Marshal Tim just to give you a bit of a heads up. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. So apps in Ukraine, cutting edge technology at the moment, not just with drones, but what they're doing across the board. And you'll be aware that we've spent £13 billion so far supporting Ukraine, with another 500 million pledge that the Ukraine Defence Contact Group a couple of weeks ago. So part of that is investing in Ukraine, and then part of that, is also bringing that technology back to the UK. You're probably tracking one of the most exciting things that doesn't sound exciting on paper, but it actually is, which is Project Lyra. And that's about bringing technology from Ukraine back and then being able to generate that capacity, that manufacturing capacity back in the UK. First of its time. It's the first time the Ukrainians have made that sort of contract with anyone. And that also brings us a project called Octopus. And Octopus is a low-cost drone interceptor that's previously been announced. So lots of really exciting things and lots of ability to be able to innovate. So a couple of things you'd have heard about, maybe Breakstop and Nightfall. Nightfall's the follow-on from Breakstop, which gives us a ground-launched ballistic missile out to beyond 500 kilometres, stuff we'd never dream of doing for our own armed forces 5 years ago. So it's about working with our Ukrainian partners to sort of bring that technology back. So that's absolutely linked in with the Strategic Defence Review and with the formation of the National Armaments Director Group to bring this technology, the innovation together with the delivery and with the exports, and then be able to support it in the future, which all links together.
I suppose there's nothing really that has come out of the Ukrainian war or Putin's illegal invasion, except for the fact that the Ukrainians have really led the way in terms of defence innovation and technology, and to do that at the same time as being set against one of the wickedest men in the world is a huge achievement. Yes. That was an observation rather than a question. So I just wondered if there are any delays in delivering the kit, creating capability gaps, given where we are.
Delays in equipment we're procuring for Ukraine. So the nature of the equipment that we're providing, so it's all quite a lot cutting edge stuff. So there's the standard procurements, so the drumbeat of ammunition and procurements that we do, and that regularly goes on behind the scenes and pretty much runs on rails now. We're sadly a number of years in. The exciting stuff is very iterative, very spiral. So we're absolutely cutting edge with programs like Breakstop and Nightfall, and therefore it's hard to sort of say where they'll develop and which point we'll hand them over into Ukraine. So it doesn't have a sort of set timeline like a traditional procurement that we'd have for ourselves. But obviously the Ukrainians are very keen to get that capability across their border as soon as they can and develop it and integrate it.
Well, there's a very close ongoing discussion and dialogue with Ukraine about what they need and when they need it by. And the areas they're focused on particularly are air defence for obvious reasons, drones and counter-drone technology, and long-range strike. And with all but air defence, I think Ukraine is increasingly developing its own domestic manufacturing and innovation capabilities. So we're supporting with cash money and skills. To some extent, we're onboarding back into the UK, where we have cutting-edge manufacturing capabilities, and we can spiral develop their capabilities. But much more of our support now is in the form of cash for their own domestic manufacturing than it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago, except for air defence, where these are very, very complex systems they have to go by.
If I may add to that, I think the brilliance of this partnership is the fact that we have a lot of exquisite air defence capabilities, for example, and the Ukrainians have a lot more attritable air defence systems, and the UK knowledge with our amazing prime contractors to bring this together into a system of systems is hugely, hugely powerful. And you'll also note that we've had our first Ukrainian unicorn, so the first company that's listed on the UK stock exchange for over $1 billion. So, there are great investment opportunities there and great partnerships.
Thank you.
Rachel and I have just come back from Ukraine, amongst other 20 other MPs, and talking to the top drone man, he says that they can innovate within a week. And the interesting knowledge that we got from that was that they use their young drone operators to actually define what it is about their own drones and the incoming Russian drones that they need to alter, they need to innovate on. And it's a fascinating process. We also learned that the war is likely to continue for several years, so the UK is going to have to be prepared to provide the Ukrainians with that amount of support for several years to come, I would suggest. Do you agree with that?
I couldn't comment on the operational issues in Ukraine at the moment, but we are ready to stand by them for as long as it takes. That is the stated position, and we continue to do so.
I'd also add that the European Union need to recognise that it is much their war as it is the rest of Eastern Europe's war, and until they recognise that and produce the goods, the Ukrainians will continue to suffer at the hands of that ghastly, ghastly man.
I'm going to move on, presumably, I think, to you, Emily, if I may, and talk about Ajax, the dreaded subject of Ajax. I gather that the interim in-service delivery has been temporarily frozen. When is the Army going to finally decide this matter one way or another? Either we are going to have Ajax or we're not. But I think people need to know, particularly those people that are worried about their personal health, what the position is on the Ajax programme.
Thank you. So it's worth saying, first of all, that clearly the safety of our soldiers is of utmost importance. You're clearly tracking the exercise Titan Storm, where 33 soldiers reported symptoms of noise and vibration. 5 are still under medical review, and the rest were returned to work with no follow-on conditions. We're very clear now, after various safety reports, that Ajax, when maintained and operated as designed, presents no safety concerns. However, what we need to do now is work very closely with General Dynamics and ministers to make sure that we can get Ajax back into service in a measured way where we can assure that safety and assure our position.
What's the timetable likely to be for that?
So we're working on the timetable at the moment, and I know that the Minister of Defence Readiness and Industry wants to make an announcement to the House, so it would be wrong of me to preempt that, obviously. But industry have been working very hard on a number of activities that will enable us to modify this on a growth to Ajax 2, which is very important. So this sees us do things like composite rubber tracks and automatic track tensioners, and all of this will improve the lived experience of the soldiers in the back of the platform. So if you imagine if you're in the back of a platform, you've got no light, clearly no windows, and you're travelling cross country, you're looking at screens, and even if there's a tiny bit where your track hasn't been tensioned to the right amount, you could feel that adversely really, really quickly. So it's the human dynamic of being in the back of that platform. For those of us who've operated in armour, it's hard. And therefore making that experience as comfortable for the users as possible is part of the plan to get to Ajax 2. Safety is an absolute given, that no soldier should come out of that platform and be injured in any way. So this is taking us to a new platform that will be much improved from the current Ajax 1.
So you were very clear in that reply that there are no safety issues with Ajax. How can we be sure that that's really true when the senior army officers gave in writing to the Ministry of Defence Procurement that it was safe, and it wasn't until you went to the exercise that you referred to that the problems were discovered? How can we be sure that this is safe or will ever be safe?
So when it's operated and maintained correctly within its parameters, it is, we have no safety concerns about it. And you'll know that it's one of the most trialled and tested platforms that we've ever brought into service for that reason. So that's what the safety reviews have found. Obviously, when it's operated outside those parameters, which is the concern that you're talking about on Exercise Titan Storm, then those safety parameters are breached, and obviously there's a consequence to that.
Neil, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, General, you're a soldier, you know. I mean, which is incorrect, the operating parameters or what they were asked to do on the exercise?
So the exercise was part of growth trials, so it was quite a difficult test. The soldiers had been out on it for a prolonged period of time. Clearly we had a situation where the platform wasn't operated and maintained within the specification it should have been, and that led to the incident. We know now, because we've done all the research, that within that, if it is operated within those standards and within those specifications, it is safe. That's what we're being told by the Army Safety Investigation Team, and that's what's been reported. What we now need to do is make sure that platform is always operated within that. And in the meantime, make sure that we are developing the platform to get to Ajax 2 so we can make these improvements and make a more comfortable ride back to safety is sacrosanct, but we also can improve the lived experience of our soldiers in the back of that platform, no doubt.
So the commanders on the exercise were either ignorant of or chose to ignore the operating parameters of the vehicle system.
So, of course, as you're travelling cross-country, the tension of the track and things alter over time. It was a very long exercise, and the soldiers were on the platforms for a long period of time. So it wasn't willful ignorance, as you might suggest, but it is part of the part of operating on armour. Now that we're aware of that and we're tracking that, we can get to a position whereby we now know what instructions we can give our soldiers to do sort of checks every time they stop the vehicle and that sort of thing. And of course, leading to Ajax 2, when you get things like automatic track tensioners, that takes that out of it, and therefore you're creating a technical solution rather than a solution that your soldier has to do.
My understanding of the problem was the original vehicle, which could have been bought off the shelf, with the 6 variants, increased the weight from 28 tonnes to 42 tonnes. So how are you technically going to be able to, and that is what causes the problem, the weight on the tracks basically, and that's what causes the noise and vibration. How are you physically going to be able to technologically overcome that problem?
So at the moment, we're working really hard with General Dynamics on solving that problem. One of the things we've looked at mentioned sort of composite rubber track. So we're doing trials. We're going to start doing trials on that at the end of the year that will look at whether that's a value for money option, whether that makes a sustained difference to the platform. As we mentioned, things like automatic track tensioners will just take that edge off. But also what we're asking the soldiers to do when they're in the back of that platform. I mean,